Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We're on now week 2, chapter 2 of the book that we're reading through together, titled The Women of Christmas, written by Liz Curtis Higgs. Hope you guys enjoyed the last chapter and looking forward to going through this one with you. We'll go ahead and get started. The chapter is titled Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence, and it starts off with the poem, so I'll read that first. It says, Let all mortal flesh keep silence, and with fear and trembling stand. Ponder nothing earthly minded, for with blessing is his hand. Christ our God to earth descendeth, our full homage to demand. Translated by Gerald Moultrie, Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence, 1864. Okay, now with the chapter. Let all mortal flesh keep silence. Shh! I heard that sound all through my childhood for good reason. I was either talking too loudly or talking too much. However gentle the correction, I chafed at having to be quiet. Only as I matured did I finally learn the value of silence. Sometimes our speechlessness is born of reverence, sometimes of fear. For Zechariah, silence would soon become a holy necessity. While Elizabeth waited and prayed in the court of women, her husband experienced the Lord's mighty power in an up-close and personal way as he stood before the altar of incense. Luke 1:19. The angel said to him, I am Gabriel. Why save his name until this moment? Because Gabriel means strength of God. It was time for Zechariah to stop thinking in human terms and get the big picture. Luke 1:19. I stand in the presence of God. Zechariah had to be trembling in his sandals. Gabriel is the centennial of God, the messenger who inhabits God's presence. He is with God. In that holy place was Zechariah. Suddenly I have an urge to slip off my shoes, bow my head, fall to my knees. Holy, holy, holy. Luke 1:19. And I have been sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. The angel came to evangelize Zechariah, the usual term for preaching the gospel. We have no record of Gabriel speaking to others during this visitation, only Zechariah, whose name means God remembers. The Almighty presence was proof of that remembrance. Alas, Zechariah had already voiced his doubts. It seems Gabriel had heard enough from this priest. Luke 1:20. And now you will be silent and not able to speak. Strong words, strongly spoken. Now listen. How could poor Zechariah do otherwise? When he opened his mouth, no sound came out. Just as Gabriel promised, Zechariah had no power of speech. Many scholars believe he also lost his ability to hear, in part because the Greek word kephos can also mean deaf. And later his neighbors made signs to Zechariah, suggesting he couldn't hear their voices. When Gabriel told him, You shall live in silence, he meant it. Luke 1:20, until this day happens. Until what day happens? What shall come to pass? However righteous Zechariah was, he had doubted this holy messenger and trusted his own opinion. I am old. My wife is old. A child is not possible. Would God still honor his promise, still give Zechariah a son? Luke 1:20. Because you did not believe my words. When Gabriel pointed out Zechariah's sin, the old priest surely feared all was lost. Yet in the same breath, the angel announced the best news Zechariah could hope for. Those words, those heavenly promises about his son would still be fulfilled. Luke 1:20, which will come true at their appointed time. God be praised. Despite Zechariah's doubts, fears, and disbelief, he would hold a son in his arms. Gabriel didn't tell him when this would occur, but he didn't need to. Zechariah's faith had been fully restored. He knew it would happen on time, God's time. The loss of speech wasn't punishment. It was the proof Zechariah had asked for, the assurance of God's power. If I can take away your voice, can I not also give you a son? Zechariah's silence may have served another purpose. Perhaps the world was not ready to learn about his son yet, and Elizabeth, more than anyone else, deserved to hear the good news first. With his angelic mission accomplished, Gabriel disappeared as quickly as he arrived, leaving Zechariah in a quandary. He had to speak. Wasn't the crowd expecting him to pronounce a blessing over them? Luke 1:21. Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering why he stayed so long in the temple. The incense offering was a brief ceremony, so naturally they were bewildered at his delay. Had the crowd stopped praying and started murmuring, we can be sure Elizabeth's eyes were turned toward the entrance of the holy place, watching for her husband to emerge and proclaim the blessing of Aaron. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. But Zechariah didn't give the assembly a blessing. He gave them silence. Luke 1:22. When he came out, he could not speak to them. We know why. He was Elam, the Hebrew word for mute. Out of habit, his lips might have been moving, but nothing came out. Instead, he gestured wildly, trying to explain himself. Luke 1:22. They realized he had seen a vision in the temple, for he kept making signs to them, but remained unable to speak. What precisely had happened to Zechariah in the holy place was unclear to them, but the people knew he had seen something special from God, as he made signs to them with his hands. Nothing formal, not true sign language. I suspect it was closer to the exaggerated gestures we use when we play charades or were bumbling efforts when visiting a foreign country. During one family vacation, we pulled into a small post office outside Toulouse. Not knowing the French word for postage stamp, I formed a square with my fingers, then pretended to press imaginary stamps onto the corners of my postcards, before joining my hands like wings and flapping them toward the door. Airmail, right? My family couldn't stop laughing, the postal workers also still laughing. That brings us to Zechariah. What did he shape with his hands? An angelic being? A babe in his arms? His future son's top 10 list of attributes? Whatever Zechariah demonstrated to the crowd, they were convinced he'd seen a vision and been struck speechless. No calling in sick for Zechariah, though. He still had his religious duties to fulfill, even though he had no voice and was deaf. All that week, Zechariah likely remained at the temple in a special apartment provided for the priest. Elizabeth might have returned each morning and evening to pray, then lodged with close friends or family members in Jerusalem. Did she and her husband ever have a moment alone? Zechariah must have been eager to convey the angel's pronouncement, whether that meant spelling out words in the sand or scratching the news onto a wax tablet, and Elizabeth must have been dying to know more about what had happened in the temple. An angel? A baby? How was it possible? Hard to guess who was more frustrated, husband or wife, as they tried to communicate without speaking or hearing. We can see Elizabeth gesturing right along with Zechariah, alternately smiling and frowning as she grasps some nugget of information, only to be stymied by another. This much would have been easily imparted. You're going to have a child, Elizabeth. You're going to have our son. Luke 1:23. When his time of service was completed, he returned home. At last, they were alone and beneath their own roof. Elizabeth could perform her wifely duties, praying a child might be conceived, just as the angel had foretold. We have no record of her doubting, though a few practicalities did need to be addressed. Had her flow ceased from some time earlier, or did Elizabeth still follow her monthly calendar with care, not wanting to miss what the local midwives insisted was the most opportune time? She had never been fertile before. Was she now? In the days and weeks that followed, Elizabeth probably walked from one corner of their home to the other, praying aloud, begging God to bless her womb. She would have avoided green vegetables, salt, and fats, since first-century women knew how troublesome these foods could be to an unborn child. Dared she dream of a tiny hand latching onto her forefinger, a toothless smile in a cherub's round face, a plaintive cry in the night, music to her ears alone? If Zechariah was right, if God was merciful. Luke 1:24. After this, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant. I love how the Bible presents miracles in such a matter-of-fact way. Then this happened, just as God had said it would. What we call miraculous, God calls business as usual. It wasn't long before Elizabeth conceived and was expecting a baby. Thanks be to God. Had I been Elizabeth, I would have run from one friend's house to the next, spreading the good news. But she did just the opposite. Elizabeth stayed out of view, and the miracle remained a secret. Luke 1:24. And for 5 months remained in seclusion. That's right. For the first 22 weeks of her pregnancy, Elizabeth didn't leave the house or go out in public. Was it fear that kept her under wraps? Was she waiting for further proof? Women who desperately want to be pregnant can convince themselves they feel queasy in the morning, or their breasts are more sensitive, or their energy is depleted. No scholar or teacher can be certain why Elizabeth hid herself, but many have ventured to a guess. Perhaps she wanted to avoid gawking neighbors. My mother was pregnant with me at the age of 43, which was highly unusual back in the day. She confessed to me that she was embarrassed throughout her pregnancy and avoided going anywhere, except bridge club, of course. Maybe Elizabeth wanted to wait until she was so obviously pregnant that no one could accuse her of lying. Could be she cherished the time alone with God or wanted to care for her deaf and mute husband. However temporary his condition, Zechariah must have struggled with his new limitations. On the positive side, with Elizabeth sequestered to their house, no one could accuse her of sexual misdemeanor. The child would assuredly belong to Zechariah the priest. Perhaps Elizabeth wanted to treasure the good news until she was ready for the big reveal. Better to savor in private her precious secret rather than to attempt explanations that no one would accept. Maybe she was simply avoiding all the unwanted advice that relatives and friends love to dish out. Theories abound, but only Elizabeth herself could tell us the truth. Exiled by choice with a husband who could neither speak nor hear, she turned to the one who gladly listened to her as she poured out her hopes and fears, her joys and concerns. Years of suffering had brought her very near to the heart of God. Why that specific length of time, though? Not 2 full trimesters, 5 months. Here's my take. First-time mothers usually sense the quickening, the first movement of the child, the certainty of life between the 18th and 20th week of pregnancy. In this context, the word quick doesn't mean swift, it means alive. I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing when I felt the first tiny shift. Even when all the other symptoms, the quickening makes everything real. Elizabeth might have been waiting for the absolute assurance. The second clue for mothers-to-be is the expounding waistline. Every woman's body is different, but by the end of the 5th month, Elizabeth's baby bump was bound to show. Did they have maternity fashions 2,000 years ago? Maybe women simply belted their tunics higher. This we know. When the time came for Elizabeth's self-imposed silence to end, she spoke with boldness and gratitude. Luke 1:25. The Lord has done this for me. We can see her stepping across the threshold into the bright light of day, hiding nothing. This is the Lord's doing, she told her neighbors. Zechariah had also done his loving duty by her, just as he had throughout their marriage. But Elizabeth knew the real source of their babe inside her. Children are a gift from the Lord. Elizabeth couldn't take credit for being fertile any more than Zechariah could take a bow for being virile. As in all things, God alone deserves the glory. We can hear the exaltation in Elizabeth's voice. She was barren no more. Though her husband was silent, God had spoken. Luke 1:25. In these days, more like months. But we know what she meant. Since you last saw me, while I've been away from you, Elizabeth described this season when the Lord was visiting me at his own time in a very personal way. Only a woman with a deep and abiding relationship with God could make such a claim. I have been with God these many months, and he has been with me. Luke 1:25. He has shown me favor. When we first met Elizabeth, we learned she was righteous, meaning God's favor was already upon her. But now his favor was showing. It was visible, undeniable. He decided to help me, Elizabeth explained. How kind the Lord is. So kind that he changed everything. Her body, her calling, her future, and her reputation. Luke 1:25. And taken away my disgrace among the people. I have suffered, she admitted, but her public disgrace was finally over. Now people will stop thinking there is something wrong with me. We know there was nothing ever wrong with Elizabeth. She'd made room in her heart, body, and soul for a miracle, and God had the situation well in hand. Through all her years of feeling less than, Elizabeth had worshipped a more than God. Now she intended to give him the glory for it. What's the opposite of disgrace? Grace. God filled her with his favor, his mercy, his loving kindness. Then he filled her with a son from the seed of Zechariah. And he didn't quit there. When we meet Elizabeth again, she will be filled with joy, with praise, and with a gift that only could come from God, who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine according to his power that is at work within us. His power in us. Breathtaking, isn't it? Amen. God is so good. So in this chapter again, we see God at work in Elizabeth's life. And she was faithful to serve him, and he was faithful to show his favor upon her, to bless her and her husband with a child. And just be encouraged today. Whatever you're going through, the things that look impossible, God is able to do the impossible. What is impossible with man, the Bible says, is possible with God. So be encouraged today with that. And let me know what you thought about this chapter. Did something stand out to you? Something speak to your heart? I would love to hear about it in the comments of this video. And I look forward to the next chapter with you guys. God bless you. Keep you. Love you.